Welcome to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio, bringing you insights and strategies to help you create a magnificent and fulfilling second half of life. Here's your host, certified professional retirement coach and best-selling author, Dr. Dorian Mintzer.
I want to welcome all of you to my fourth Tuesday Revolutionize Your Retirement Interview with Expert series. I'm Dorian Mintzer, owner of Revolutionize Retirement and your host for the series. Without any further ado, introduce our wonderful guest, Claire Panke. I've met Claire, just to give a little personal part of it. I met Claire years ago at positive aging conferences, and I've seen her over the years at various conferences, and she's just this wonderful person, as you will hear. She's a graduate of Georgetown University, and she studied film at New York University, earning a certificate in film. Her second feature documentary, called Light Years, profiles three older adults who infuse their lives with creativity, service, intergenerational connections, and a knack for reinvention. Her first film, A Chance to Grow, was broadcast on the Discovery Channel, National Geographic Television, and other international venues, and was awarded a signed Golden Eagle. She directed three short documentaries, has had several audio interviews broadcast on NPR's Morning Edition and All Things Considered, and serves on several judging panels, including the News and Documentary Emmy Awards. She also works freelance as a writer, editor, photographer, and a nurse consultant. In front of the camera, Claire served as a national spokesperson for a campaign to protect healthcare funding, appearing in national broadcast commercials, print and radio ads, and congressional publications. The other part of Claire's background is that she's a neonatal nurse, which I think is just phenomenal to kind of think about combining this intensive nursing experience with being a filmmaker. So welcome. I'm so glad you're with us today, Claire. And I thought maybe we could start by, we've been waiting for this for a while, so I'm really glad you're here. Briefly discuss it's really a unique combination that you have of being a nurse and a filmmaker. So, how did you get interested in making films? Why don't you kind of start with telling us that?
Okay. All right. Well, I actually I went to high school that was a little progressive, and one of my English electives was film study. And I had this wonderful teacher, Nancy Krim, who just opened my world to that. And I think I was kind of oriented toward the visual anyways. And it kind of combined the storytelling interest I had, the visual interest I had, the human interest, fascination I had, and really works with every subject. And so it appealed. I had curiosity about a lot of different topics, and I kind of leaned into documentary because I found drama and inspiration through so many personal stories, and certainly it affects the kind of nurse that I am because I see the depth of people's stories and their background, and also being a nurse affects what kind of stories I tell and what kind of films I like to see and what kind of films I like to make. So it's really, and because I work with babies, and I've spent 20-something years working on this film. My first film, of course, was about preemies, but this film is about later life. So I don't know, I've got the lifespan taken care of.
You have it sort of like this whole full circle of life. It's wonderful. Well, how did you name the film? Why did you call it Light Years?
It's multi-layered, and I like to ask people what they get out of it. Why do you think I named it Light Years, or what does that title engender in you? So anyone who does see the film or has even seen the trailer might get a little sense of that. But I think it's multi-layered, as any good title would be. And I had a couple of different titles first that were either a little clunky or didn't work. But I feel like, number one, I'm trying to shed a little light on not just age, but all our years. So if you notice, the logo actually has like a little bit of a slash in the middle. So it's that relationship between our years, and then also the light, not only shedding light on it, but also the light that's within everybody at every age, no matter what. That doesn't really diminish. There's a third element, Dory, that I would offer by way of my mother, who was such a great inspiration. I lost her a few years ago, but such a great inspiration. Unfortunately, she never got to see the film, but she talked about a lightening as you get older, kind of what May Sarton calls a lessening of the non-essential. The poet May Sarton, my mother gave me this wonderful piece from the New York Times that was I think it was an op-ed in around 1974, and she handed it to me, and it was called More Light. And it's also about this lightening, letting go of things that weighed you down. And of course, there are things about aging that can weigh us down. We all know that. But there's another element that isn't always as mind, which is this lightening. She felt a big letting go of things that didn't matter anymore. So I offer all of those as possibilities.
Oh, that's really beautiful. I hadn't actually heard that comment before, and that just resonates with me. I really like
and
the
I recommend
of it. Yeah,
I recommend May Sarton's piece, and also would welcome anyone to contact me. I can send it to you. It's a little hard to find online, but it's a beautiful piece about later life. Absolutely beautiful.
I already know I would like you to send me one, so I will send you an email to send it to me. So how did you meet? And so maybe it would be good to tell people a little about the film. I know I sort of mentioned a little. I know a few of your slides cover it because, you know, I then want to get into sort of how did you select the three characters and, you know, and some questions about that. But why don't you tell those who haven't seen the film? I've seen it now twice, and I really do love it and recommend it. And I don't know how many on the call have seen it or have seen the trailer, but why don't you describe a little first about it, and then we can get into more of the questions.
Okay. And I do describe it with the slides, so I do mention that in the slides. And again, for those of you who are not seeing the slides right now, what I say will be perfectly fine without the slides. You'll understand it. You'll be able to follow it. The slides are not essential. They enhance what I'm saying. And of course, you can contact me about the slides, and I'll mention that later. So I started this in 2002. So, I would have like a kid in college by now. But, you know, people are like, it's your baby. And I'm like, yeah, it's a heavy baby. But it started in different ways, just looking at getting older. I leaned into creativity for a while and tried to find stories that can share so many of the things that you and I learned, and so many people on the call have not only learned, but probably taught me, some of them, about some of the things that happen, the positive things that happen because of advanced age, you know, hearkening back to Gene Cohen, who I was lucky enough to meet and who influenced the film a lot. I started with a few different characters. I say characters because it's a film term, but I don't like simplifying someone to be a character. They're really film subjects. I started with a woman named Willie Mae Jackson, whose grandparents had been slaves and came up and worked with a family that I knew. She unfortunately went into heart failure during one of my interviews. But I did really want to bring in, you know, I was very aware of diversity and things like that, which doesn't, I mean, age is a criteria of diversity, right? There are some films about aging, but there are not a lot that don't delve strongly into dementia and death and disease. And so I wanted to make something that had, for another D, a lot of dimension. But I couldn't use Willie Mae, and then I found somebody else who I followed for months, and he backed out, and then I found somebody else, and then I landed on D. And from D, I met in Santa Barbara, California, and from D, I met somebody who knew Anita, and Paul was actually somebody my father knew, and he kept telling me, you want to do creativity and aging, you should do this guy, Paul Dillon, and I thought, no, Paul's too young, because he was in his early 70s, and I thought he was too young. But I ended up, once I talked to him, the idea of having a completely egalitarian, you know, one white person, one Asian person, one African-American person, one Native American person, that kind of fell aside. And I tried to find people that resonated on camera, because something that people don't always think about, Dory, is that if you interview people pretty much from their 50s down, everyone is very camera savvy. is used to not only being filmed, but filming themselves. Older people do not necessarily share that. And so sometimes people can be very uncomfortable on camera, or they don't like to navel gaze or talk about their own motivations or their own life story. Some people do. And so that was another criteria for me, quote unquote, casting the film. But I used 3 stories because I feel like 3 for an hour and a half film lets you get in a little deeper. But always in my mind, and I hope I'm answering your question, was to find stories that resonate with people who might have nothing to do with those 3 people. For instance, I'll watch a film like Boys in the Hood. I'm not from South Central Los Angeles. But I understand loyalty. I understand family. And that's a testament to the filmmaker and the actors and the writers that they found that thing that is the through line and transcends the subject matter. So I worked on it a long time. It had several incarnations. I finally finished it. It has taken me an enormous amount of time to get funded and filmed. And part of that I will also share without spending too much time is that part of that time was a caregiving journey for me with my dad and then to a lesser extent my mom. But I don't resent or regret that time spent away from the film. And I'm also a working nurse, so it's not an easy combination, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, a pretty challenging and difficult one. So tell us, I mean, you mentioned about kind of people that will appear will, and you certainly chose 3 that are just, really, I found I could resonate with all of them, and you do such a beautiful job in intertwining their stories, and we'll get more into them in a little bit too, but you mentioned about the themes and all, and what do you think are the main themes in the film, and how did you come up with them, and how did you weave them together in the 3 stories in the way that you did?
Yeah. I would say it is a combination of, I did a lot, as you know, I did a lot of research for this film.
Right.
And someone can do a film about a topic and make it very didactic and cut away to experts. And I certainly have gotten to know some visionaries in the field who I could have included in a film about positive, engaged later life. And I never wanted to make it, a Pollyanna-ish walk through tap dancing through your 90s. I always wanted to have that dimension. So I went to a lot of conferences, but I would say more than infusing the film with the themes that I learned, such as lifelong learning, which shows up in someone as lifelong curiosity, service and civic engagement, which shows up as service and giving to others, compassion, creativity. So I went to a lot of creative aging conferences and learned so much about how art and creative expression is not only helps us to process and to deal with some losses, but is an avenue through which we can have personal expression that really knows no expiration date. It's very important for us at all ages to have that sense of creative expression. And I think undermining all of it, or not undermining it, but underneath all of it is resilience, is this idea of, reinvention and resilience people can talk about a lot. But I think especially people can relate to it after the year and a half we've all had in terms of when do you feel resilient? When do you not feel so resilient? And when you haven't been socially engaged, and when you haven't been able to move around the way that you normally could, or that you don't have the connection to friends that you normally do, you don't always feel resilient. But when you get that back up, it gives you that sense of meaning and purpose. And I think it's something that many of us can relate to now. And that is just an organic part of life. And for some older people, that's certainly a challenge for them. So it's never easy, but that those elements of how do we pick ourselves up and how do we move forward and continue to have that sense of not being stuck in a time. I think that's true in all 3 people that I profiled. And so I learned about all these things, that I go to these conferences and I'd be kicking off, brain health and creativity and movement and all those things. And do I have those in my film? But it was much more of an organic osmosis where I learned more about those topics. So I might go to a conference and learn about it, but then to have it fleshed out in a human life is much more powerful. And so I learned about these things in a way that was much more powerful through being led into into how we integrate that into our lives. And so that's what I was trying to model with these three people. And all three of them looked outward to help other people at all parts of their life, but especially in their later life.
And what's so lovely, that's interesting to hear and think about, because what you do is you weave some of their earlier stories with the, who they are now and how they've evolved. And each one, is different, and the different, as you say, the different hardships and struggles and all, and the resilience that emerge, because how they emerge at this stage of life is just amazing to see, and amazing the way you took, you sort of curated the past of, with Anita from Puerto Rico and Dee and her early, years, dancing and with the troops, and then, sort of how she evolved, and then Paul, with his paint, he was a salesperson and traveling and alcohol, and then painting and, golf coach, all of it. I mean, they're just wonderful. So maybe describe, for those who haven't seen it, bring them to life a little bit for us now.
Dory, I do that in the slides. I go into depth with all the, as I go through the slides, I will speak specifically about all three of those people. If I could wait to do that, because I really talk about all three of them, is that okay?
Yeah, or would you like to do the slides now, and then we'll come back to it? Why don't we do it that way?
I'll do the slides now, but I'd like to just follow up on one thing. When you're doing a film, especially about older people, something that when you were talking, it reminded me of the unbelievable amount of decisions I had to make as a director. I've been going through all my papers, that I have over 20 years, and all my notes and everything. At one point, I lost like 3 notebooks that were my most important notebooks from all the conferences I had gone to. And I said to Anita, I lost all my notes. And she says, oh, honey, if you lost them, you didn't need them. She said, you got it all inside. But I had a question of how much of someone's youth is important to talk about when you're dealing with them in present day. So I wanted to glance backward, and the parts of the film that talk about their earlier life is kind of an homage to that great quote, which is, you're all the ages you ever were. Anita loved that, because in me, on a daily basis, I remember my 12-year-old and my 25-year-old, and my 35-year-old, because I'm 59 now. So I think that I wanted that because it's a part of who we are. We don't completely lose it, but we have to keep moving forward. So I will talk about all three stories and a little bit about them. So if you haven't seen the film, hopefully I'm not doing, what a bad trailer will do. A bad trailer for a film basically gives you the film, but I'm hoping to make all your listeners want to see more about them and maybe understand a little bit more about why I chose these three.
Great. So let's do that. And then I know I have a lot of questions. And again, I want to encourage listeners, to please submit your questions. And one of the lucky ones will win a copy of the DVD.
Yes.
Okay.
And I love questions. And anybody who has further questions, you'll be getting my email and ways to contact me. So away we go.
Away we go. Let's do the slides.
Away we go. So
come back to the other questions.
Okay. So again, for those of you who are not viewing the slides, I'm happy to share them with you. You can just send me an email, which is, you don't have to write it down now. It's info@lightyearsfilm.com. but I'll give that to you later on. But just know that what I'm going to be talking about, you don't need to see the pictures, and I'll explain anything if it gets confusing. So I'm very excited to be here. I've been a participant on many of Dory's calls and just thrilled to be presenting about my film today. So Light Years, it profiles 3 older adults who are in their 70s, their 80s, and their 90s at the time that we filmed them. I wanted to use the characters' authentic stories to tell their authentic voices, really, to tell their own stories. And my goals for the film were to help people really see beyond surface ideas about older adulthood and to find the rich stories that, you know, I think we can all agree are all around us. I also wanted to help viewers of all ages raise expectations for what later life can hold. So the film really carries an important message for all ages, right? That we're always writing our stories. Now, before COVID, which certainly changed a lot of my film plans, I was able to have a few private screenings. And following those, I really got proof that the film does resonate with viewers of all ages, which is important to me. Younger people came up to me after one of my screenings and said they now feel a lot less pressure to figure it all out before they're 30. And one of my closest friends said that because of watching Light Years, she is getting over her fear of starting a whole new career. She's a clinical psychologist and taught for a long time and then raised 3 children. And now she was very afraid of going back to work, and now she said she has the courage to do so. So that's pretty powerful. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my inspiration for the film. Those of you who are looking at a slide might be a little confused. Those who are not, I will tell you the slide is of a slushy winter New York corner. And while it might be confusing, I'm here to tell you that inspiration can come from surprising places. Not far from this exact spot on 72nd Street in New York, on a winter day much like this one, I was crossing the street with my head down, and facing me and coming towards me was a woman navigating this slush with a walker. And as we passed each other, almost in slow motion, I looked up and saw this powerful combination of fear and determination on her face. I mean, I really saw her. By the time I got to the other side, I was asking myself, what is it really like to be old? And I thought about that perspective. I got in touch with my own ageism, and that eventually led to the creation of the film. I didn't know how long it would take, I got to say. So I wanted to say a little bit about the power of story. You know, I've referenced a little that I've been to a lot of conferences and I've read a lot of books, but it's very different when things that you learn at those places comes to life. And I'm very aware, Light Years is not my first documentary. And I'm very aware of how years of photography and filmmaking has affected the way I see the world. You know, there's something about turning your full attention to someone else, to their life, to their stories. It really changes you, and it changes them too. It changes the way they feel valued and heard and seen. Light Years is only 3 stories, but a good story can make a big impact because that's how we're moved, and that's how we're moved to change. I wanted to find, as I've mentioned, 3 people who were relatable, who could communicate on camera in a way that is not always easier for older people. Anyone on this call is aware that we need to create a different narrative about later life. And having listened to many of Dory's calls, I know that a lot of you are doing just that, changing not only how people view the second half of life from the outside, but from within. And media is a powerful tool to help weave that new narrative. Because remember, our negative ideas about aging are not just about how we feel about turning 70 or 80 or 90, but also how we feel about turning 40 or 50 or 60. So how might we shift the story we model for younger people, one that joins generations instead of pitting them against each other? And how does it relate to our own self-concept as we get older? I hope, and I've intended, that Light Years invite viewers to ask, how do you think about your own passage through time? How do we judge ourselves? And how do we integrate the chapters of our lives? The three people in Light Years, Dee, Anita, and Paul, model the choice to remain engaged in community, to continue learning and giving back, and reveals the power of creativity in our lives at any age. I wanted to offer images that differ from those that kind of gray out a whole section of the population, and instead offer full color renderings with dignity and dimension. I didn't want to make a Pollyanna-ish film about aging. And in fact, all three face challenges and threats to their independence. But it's how they respond. It's their resiliency that allows them to transcend those challenges without ignoring them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about three people in the film. Anyone can go to the website, which will be referenced at the end of the conversation, and you can read more about these three people. I'm going to start with Anita. So I'm starting with a picture of Anita and I. Anita was born in 1916, which is before women could vote, right? Her Latina cultural heritage figures very prominently in the film. She immigrated to New York City from Puerto Rico in 1929 during the height of the Depression. And from a very young age, Anita had to work to support her entire family. She faced considerable prejudice against immigrants. Sounds familiar. As a young woman, but she learned to use her innate talents and on more than a few occasions created opportunities for herself despite those difficult circumstances. She learned to dance by watching movies and went on to perform at the Copacabana and many other venues in New York City, and started what would be 80 years of creative endeavors in theater, music, and poetry. Anita was the matriarch who modeled creativity and hard work through times of struggle for her family, and many of her family ended up going into creative fields. In her 90s, Anita collaborated with two of her granddaughters, which I have a slide right here of seeing her with her granddaughters, Annika and Lorca. This is something she did in her 90s, a musical drama. Her granddaughter, Lorca, directed it. She is a director and a writer and an actress, and one did the music, and Anita, that's Annika, who is Lorca's sister, and Annika also composed the music for Light Years, of which I'm very proud and pleased, and Annika is a very gifted musician. So the show that they did was called Temple of the Souls. It was performed off-Broadway and won many awards, and you can look up templeofthesouls.com and listen to the music. It's absolutely gorgeous. Hoping to see another rendition of this. But Anita wrote this starting as a poem, and then so it was a very multi-generational collaboration. In fact, Anita spent most of her life nurturing young talent in the arts. She would have them over at her apartment like a salon. You know, she would coach them. I was present for some of these times when she would bring people over, whether they were dancers or actresses, and give them confidence and tips. In fact, the film includes a scene of a young actor talking about her influence on him. At one point for Anita, a major fall changes everything for her. But we see how resilient even somebody in their 90s can be. The next person I'm going to talk about is Paul. I will also share now that Anita passed away, unfortunately, before she could see the film, which breaks my heart. And I'll share with your listeners also that just a few weeks ago, we lost Paul, so I'm very sad about that. So I will be talking about him for the first time in the past, which is a little tough. But Paul worked for 30 years as a corporate manager, traveling around the country, often away from his family. It led to some kind of dark times for him. But he found ways to restart his life after retirement. His later years were marked by service and mentorship. And anybody who has seen the film or met Paul will tell you he's an open-hearted person with family and spirituality at the center of his life, something that might inspire some of your listeners. He took up painting at the age of 51, ended up becoming quite an accomplished portrait artist. His works hang in many different golf courses around the country. He kind of combined his love of golf with painting. But he talks in the film openly about facing some major personal challenges, eventually emerging through a huge period of reinvention in his life. Paul also faced some physical challenges. He either had 2 hips and a knee replaced or 1 hip and 2 knees. I can't remember. But he's also head of a large family. He's the father of 6 and a whole bunch of grandchildren, a real multi-generational family, and he saw them a lot, which is one of the main sources of purpose and meaning in his life, was that family life. He also found ways to extend his father role in a different way. Late in life, he became a college golf coach at Fordham University and was served as a role model for hundreds of young men over the 25 years. There are scenes in the film in which Paul talks about how he feels about working with these young team members. And there's also scenes that have them talking about how they feel about working with him. Very influential. Every year, Fordham alumni have what's called a Dylan Bowl. In fact, they just had one last Friday, which was probably the most special, included his son and his grandson. The photo that is up, for those of you who cannot see it, is it's a photo after the Dylan Bowl. And what some of you guys are going to see or hear or imagine with a group of, golf team alumni is a group of white guys in shorts. And I will say that it's too simplistic because, in fact, some of these guys were facing very tough futures. Paul was very active in creating scholarships for young men from low-income backgrounds. One alumni told me that the scholarship and Coach Paul changed the entire course of his life. So I think we have to not underestimate the positive role that older male figures can play in life. This work for Paul was marked by rich, long-lasting relationships. He was not only a father figure, but a friend and, someone who they trusted and a real model of integrity. The next person I'm going to talk about is Dee, who was the first of these 3 that I met. Dee danced in the MGM musicals of the 40s and later became a journalist and a professor. She's been an inspiration and mentor for many. She is 98 years old. She's living in Peekskill, New York right now, and I will say that I'm planning a special Q&A with her because we had one Q&A that included the people in the film, but if anybody would like to be part of that special Zoom Q&A with her, I'm planning it now, and, she's 98, so we're going to do it soon. But she's strong, sharp as a tack, engaged, wonderful to talk to. But through her life, she took many younger students under her wing, including those stuck in cycles of gang violence and abuse at home. I didn't go into that too much in the film, but it's a big part of who she is. She always believed in them and taught them to believe in themselves. Dee also volunteered at a local food bank. We have a scene of this in the film, where she joins other retirees out in the fields collecting extra crops for food co-ops, the food co-ops that are many in her Southern California area. People think of Ventura and Santa Barbara County as just about a lot of wealthy people, but there are a lot of people who need help and have some food insecurity in that area as well. I loved it when one younger friend said to me, "I don't want to be more like Dee when I'm 85. I want to be more like Dee now." So that kind of hints at the cross-generational influence this woman had. The photo I have right now is a dance class, and anybody who has seen the trailer or does see the trailer will see Dee in her dance class that she took in Santa Barbara, many ages. When you do, or if you see it again, keep in mind when Dee is dancing in her dance class, she's not trying to act young, right? She's not trying to fit in with young people. She's always danced. And what comes across, I believe strongly, on screen is this joy when you see her moving and forgetting her pains and her aches and what she says looks like an English teacher dancing African. But she says it's the rhythm of basic life, and I loved it. She loves the drumming and the culture from which this dance tradition comes. I did make a an extra scene that I'll put up on a website. I think I'll put up on the website or a link to it on YouTube. It didn't make it into the film, but it's this: after the dance class, we had a spontaneous conversation with all the young people talking about what Dee means to them. And at the end of each class, Dee would bring all the dancers into the center. And this scene really shows them all kind of gazing at her with these open faces and listening to her and reacting to her, and really gives proof of the evidence that went on with her, but I would posit goes on many more times than we hear about. You know, often it's like younger people being nice to older people, but there's a mutual exchange that goes on that I thought was really important to show in the film. This is just an extra dose. There are scenes in the film of Yosemite. There's a picture right now up of Dee and I in Yosemite. And I will share that my work on the film really changed at how I look at getting older and how I feel about my current age in contrast to some of my friends, you know, so that exposure really opens up the lens through which you look at yourself. I did a lot of the shooting myself, and it was very challenging, but created a deep sense of trust. The next photo is of some of the crew members with whom I worked occasionally. And you know, it was really another fun dividend was the relationships that the other crew developed and how working on the film made them think differently about both aging in generally and you know, not only aging in generally, but the older people in their own lives and their own aging. So including on the lower right is the editor of the film, Linda Hattendorf. I'm almost finished with the slides, by the way, but another dividend is when we engage in authentic ways to share stories, we can strengthen bonds within families as family members see their loved ones in a new light. It creates like that life story, that sense of legacy. And I'm very moved at how the film became a vessel for pride and affection among family members. And you know, now that they're gone, it's really a gift for Anita's and Paul's families, and certainly for Dee's family as well. But most importantly to me, the three subjects told me that they gained a new perspective on their lives, in part that I chose them and in part that it helped them see through a different window. You know, the film help them see their life stories kind of come together. And on a subtle level, the film invites viewers to take that what I call self-generational glance. You don't have to be older to do this, right? To ask yourself, what is the relationship between our younger selves and our older selves? To think about how we judge our mistakes, whether we learn from our regrets, and is there room for self-kindness and growth? What about our essential selves stays the same? What we do and who we are. The end of the film really highlights these reflections. So Light Years is really a way of my way of creating a ripple. COVID did have a huge effect on my plans. I am starting to work on distribution, and just to let people know, I cannot yet publicly show the film. I can have private screenings. I'm trying to get a distributor for educational. If I don't get one, you know, I'll try to figure that out on myself. But how, you know, I have DVDs and I can sell some of them individually, but I have streaming options, and a special, you know, the handout will show a special limited streaming option for people on this call. I'm also working on creating a discussion guide and have a couple of people, including Dory, who I want to reach out to once I finish that to get some input. And I'm also collecting, I have a long list of outreach ideas, but welcome any of yours. So, you know, the slide up right now is, if you haven't yet seen the website, I'm going to give you the website right now, and you can also find that on the handout, which is on Dory's event page, and it's lightyearsfilm.com. lightyearsfilm.com, and then as an easy email to remember, I have a lot of emails, but you can do info@lightyearsfilm.com if you're interested in an individual purchase, private group screenings, and suggest any outreach ideas. I just ask, like, if you're an educator and you want to do it in a classroom, just wait just a little while so I can get some educational distribution figured out, whether I'm going to do that myself or whether I'm going to work with a distributor. All right. So
Well, it's just so impressive, Claire. I have a bunch of questions, but let me just, well, first of all, Lorca, Anita's granddaughter, is part of this call, and she says, bravo, bravo, Claire. This is a great film for everyone to see. So glad to know Claire and that she celebrated our grandmother, Anita, in this amazing tribute to aging and life. So I just wanted to recognize.
And Gloria, her mother, who is Anita's first daughter, is also on the call from California. And I believe Annika's listening as well. So wonderful.
Oh, that's
Thank you, Lorca.
So Shella from Virginia says, of the following factors, family of origin influence, unique personal character, or spiritual beliefs, which do you believe is the most influential for the resilience and positivity of your film subjects?
Family of origin, unique personal... Read those three again to me, Dory.
Sure. Family of origin influence, unique personal character, or spiritual beliefs. Which do you believe is the most influential for the resilience and positivity of your film subjects?
I think it's hard to ferret one out because I think all three, I mean, this may seem like a cop-out, but I really think all three influence. And I would say also one can be stronger in your life and lead you that way. But if you have a family of origin, like Lorca's family, you know, like the family that Lorca and Gloria and Annika are part of, you know, there was such a modeling of resilience and reinvention. But if you personally don't want to do that, you're not going to do it. And for Paul, spirituality became a big part of his life, and ethics and integrity and modeling things and taking care of other people, which is also very much a part of Dee's life, is helping other people. How can I be of service? She said, how can I serve in my later years? That was a big part. So all three of these stories kind of interweave all of those, but I would add another one to that, which is your exposure to other people doing it. And it's not necessarily in your family of origin. So the idea of, you know, ingesting and sharing the idea of our potential at any age is something that is important, whether you're doing it as in terms of being a spokesperson against ageism, like someone like Ashton Applewhite is so good at, you know, kind of challenging our assumptions and challenging what we think is funny about getting older, or the way we speak about ourselves as we turn 50 or 60 or 70. So all of those build resilience, but I would say probably the middle one, your own personal things. However, we don't exist as islands. Our own personal personalities are, I think, a sum total of all those other influences. But it's a beautiful question to help us think about how the choices that we make are not just from ourselves, but that idea that our lens changes based on what we're exposed to. And sometimes you just have to change the focus a little to see things a lot differently. But thank you for that beautiful question, Sella.
You know, I just want to comment on, I mean, there's such poetry, and it's just, you know, your presentation, I think, is just beautiful, Claire, and just what you said sort of resonates with something you said earlier, and I think there's something about shifting the lens that we have, shifting the way we either tell our stories, or, you know, as I often say to people, we can't change things that happen, but we can change the meaning we put on them and the stories we tell ourselves. But your eye as a filmmaker and the noticing things and just the way you're presenting it, you know, just shifting our vision and just being able to notice other things and not make assumptions. And it's sort of like the mirroring that we have with each other. I mean, I can so appreciate that, you know, your involvement with these three people was so important, both for you and the world to see your film, but also for these people to see their life reflected in sort of what you saw in them and from them. And I mean, it's beautiful. So I just wanted to comment
thank you so much. And you also asked me early on how I got into filmmaking. And I think about that first class I took as a 16 or 17-year-old, you know, and I was taking photography also where I grew up in Scarsdale, New York, and, you know, had this film study class that had me look at the layers in a film. And one of the best things, I'm one of these freaks that really likes public speaking. Not too many people agree with me, but I like it, and I feel when I feel passionate about something. But one of the nicest things that someone can say after watching my film is that it's artistic, because I worked really hard at that. And I would say, without trying to be too self-conscious or precious about that, that May Sarton piece that I can send to anybody, or you can Google up, it's called More Light. One of the things I infused into the film, anybody who's watched the film, and Dora, you've seen it twice, you might recall a lot of like a motif of water and oceans kind of coming and waves coming to the shore and coming back. And one of the things that May Sarton says is that piece is age is no more a fixed point than the sunrise or sunset or the ocean tide. And that organic flow is something I infused into that. So that's a little like secret little Easter egg, it's in there intentionally. It's not an accident, some of the visual symbolism in there, but I really appreciate it. And I love talking about this and using the film not as the conversation, but to stir other conversations and to stir other people to think differently. And so I really appreciate that reflection. I appreciate it.
Great. Well, Darla from Pittsburgh says, this presentation is very inspiring and thought-provoking. I'm wondering if Claire could share a few examples of Anita, Paul, or Dee's daily practices that fortified and nourished their growth mindset and resilience.
Yes, I will do all three of them. So I'll start with Paul and I'll end with Anita. So Paul is, I would say he prayed a lot. And it doesn't resonate with everybody, but before we filmed, we prayed together. And, he just, here's the thing. If praying isn't your thing, if it's meditation or if it's something like that, it's taking the daily things that you do and elevating them and seeing that everything we do has a purpose and an influence on someone else. I think in the beginning, I'm not sure if he wanted to be in the film, but he said yes, because he believed that, he was being asked to do something. So, however, if that resonates with you, he really wanted to infuse everything he did. When he passed away, I read one obituary that said before a golf game, somebody would see him kind of like off on his own, and they said, "Are you praying for a good score?" And he says, "No, I'm praying that I'm a good partner and a good companion for the person I'm playing golf with." So that tells you a little bit about him. Dee reads the paper every day. She stays up on everything. She's curious about everybody. She asks questions, engaged, involved, and aware. And she reads a lot. And I recently lent her a book called The Hidden Life of Trees, because I know how much she loves nature and how much nature is a tonic for her as it is for me. So I would say reading and staying aware and engaged and not just, watching silly TV. Nita, she has so many of them, but I will share one that her granddaughters and daughter will laugh at. Anita used to do this routine. She exercised every day. She had these exercises well into her late 90s, but she did this thing where I tried to fit it in the film, where she would put on an emotional overcoat and she would kind of swirl her arms, I'm doing it right now, over her head, and she would circle her hands around each other and over her head, and she would say something like, "I'm putting on my emotional overcoat and nothing can hurt me." And she said, you go out into the storm and you put on a coat to protect your body, put on an emotional overcoat and protect your spirit and protect your soul. And so she would do that. And I would tell you that Anita, in all the years I knew her, I never heard her say something bad about somebody. She always found the light in someone, and she shared that, and she never, how many of us can say we've never said anything bad about somebody, at least in public? So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, I love that emotional overcoat to protect us.
Yes, I know.
Protect our soul and spirit. That's wonderful.
Yes. She was very spiritual in her own way. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mary from Chapel Hill says, service to community is so important throughout life. How can we keep our aging population engaged and continue to interact physically to reach out and support these activities without hindering safety as it relates to COVID prevention. I know vaccines and masks will help, but it's difficult to allow our elderly population to feel safe.
Oh, that's a big issue. COVID has revealed a lot about how we feel about older people, right? And I think in addition to, I didn't hear a lot of people saying, oh, just let them go. They've lived a good life. I've heard a lot of people say, oh my gosh, I have to see my grandmother. And it makes me realize how important she is to me. I don't run programs, but I would say that there are some things online that we can include older people in. Like, for instance, there's, I think, a Brazilian program where I think at the secret of this is intergenerational work. I think the secret to keeping older people involved in service is not siloing people off to do things, but merging the generations and having people work together. And especially at a time like now when we've been separated, to show value, to show what we all can bring. So, as a nurse, it would take me a little while to come up with programs and ideas to include people to be safe. And I would say as a nurse, I am concerned about Delta. I am concerned about, vaccinations and masks and things like that. But I think that there are ways that we can include older adults, helping them get online. The Brazilian things is older people and younger people in Brazil who want to learn English, and then the older people are kind of like their mentors. And they did that with a assisted living facility. I would say that I can't, right now my brain is freezing a little in terms of coming up with specific safety ways, because we have to be careful about people. But I think the question, it's Mary that asked the question. I think Mary's question is very important for all of us to think about, and to think about including an intergenerational approach to service and to helping out others, and not just siloing people off. So I apologize if that isn't a specific answer in terms of safety, but, there's a lot of individual situations, because you don't know when someone you're walking by on the street or in the supermarket has a 4-year-old battling leukemia. We can't always see the people who are immune compromised or in need of safety, and that's a big ethical part for me. But I think in terms of service, I would completely agree. It's such an important part, and we want to include older adults and middle-aged adults and young adults together in helping other people. Look at Haiti. Look at all these different, look at Afghanistan. There are ways that we could maybe incorporate ideas, or how can we come up with ideas to include older adults with what do they think might be helpful for older people. I mean, for people in these circumstances, and to not, to use the resources of experience. A lot of these people have already gone through hardship, World War II, the Depression. Some of those people are getting older and older, but there's certainly been other things that our older generation has faced, encountered, and helped solve. And I think we can benefit from wisdom and help in that degree. Look at Jimmy Carter, building houses still, 96.
Right. Yeah. And one of the beautiful things of your film too is you do show, your 3 subjects sort of at earlier stages of life too, and what was going on in the world around them. And it is so interesting to think about, part of the resilience that we all develop is, sort of so much influenced by what was going on in the world as well as what's going on in our own individual lives. But let me move on. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we forget what things were like sometimes. My mother used to talk about what it was like to hear about the Blitz in London. They didn't have radar. They didn't know it was coming. They didn't have the internet, and so sometimes it's realizing that other people have wisdom and experience that we can benefit from.
Great. So a number of other wonderful questions here. And Claire has, at one, I'm going to have to pick out somebody who's going to win from the questions asked so far and the code, but Claire has said that she can stay a little bit longer so we can integrate some of these wonderful questions. I know I have a whole bunch more too, but I think I'm going to just go with what other people are asking. So Peggy from Arlington says or asks, what strategies can we use to learn and appreciate the relationships between our younger and older selves?
I think writing and journaling helps. I think that telling the stories of their youth really helped all three of them. And I would say that incorporating younger, like family members, I remember my grade school or junior high maybe had this program every year where I think in 7th grade, I think we were old enough to be able to come up with questions where we were asked to interview an older family member. And so sometimes when you're telling a story or you're talking about your youth, it's sort of, you can kind of black out the bad parts or black out the good parts and only think about things that were difficult or only think about, it's like the social media posts in our memory, like we just either tell the good or tell the bad. But sometimes having people ask questions and probing questions with respect and distance can get you to think differently and then reflect back on our, there's a couple of programs that do these like legacy stories that help family members share. And I would also say that is something that people regret. I wish I could sit with my grandparents again and what different questions I would ask them. And so one of the scenes also that didn't make it into the film was Dee teaching a group of people at one of the Aegis senior living facilities out in Ventura an autobiography class. And she taught them how to shape their stories. So I think, without being self-centered or too self-reflective, you can share your stories and in ways that help to pull them together. And I think that there's something that happens when we tell a story. It's why people tell birth stories and death stories, because it helps them integrate in their own neuronal pathways what happened. Women will tell over and over again their labor and birth stories, but we have very complex stories. And again, that's another question that is a beautiful question for all of us to think about. How do we integrate that, that, was it about resilience or was it about integrate your life story? And I think it's a matter of also, repeat it to me.
It was sort of informing our younger and older selves, sort of how do we? I think it's also, it's a, for me, and this sounds kind of philosophical, and I don't have any expertise in this more than anybody else listening to this call does, but we all have to practice self-kindness over and over and over again. And when people say, I think it was Anita who, when I said, do you have regrets? And she said, of course, if I have regrets, I learned from my regrets. And so instead of saying, I have no regrets, life was perfect, I know we are where we are because of what we did. And there's ways to say all those difficult things were teachers for me. I can reflect to everybody right now the 20-plus year journey of this film, finally finishing and having COVID hit. And not being able to share it, it's been challenging for me. But things like today allow me to feel kinder to myself and to not feel like it was a mistake or to not feel like I wasted time. And I think that idea of reflecting with other people, especially other family members who might see us through a different lens, or friends if it's not family members or coworkers, and sharing stories with each other. We sometimes lose that oral tradition of just sitting around and telling stories. And that's a beautiful way to reframe for ourselves, our younger and older selves, because one of the things at the end of the film is Dee talking about, I thought I was going to do all this stuff and I didn't, but then I realized that everything I did was part of learning and growing and becoming myself. So that's actually the last line in the film. Shouldn't have given away, but well, it's so many layers, as you say, but I just do want to respect the time right now. So So I want to come back to a couple more, both comments and questions.
Can we remind people about the handout, to look at the handout for the special discount, to watch the film online, or to, and you know, it's a minimal fee, but I've given the film away free for too much, and I'm still covering it, but I'm giving a special discount for your listeners.
Yeah, so everybody just know in the handout, just to reiterate this, if you email Claire, info@lightyearsfilm.com, and let her know you were at this presentation, she will give you a discount, a code, so that you can either watch it streaming or you can purchase the DVD. Just know that, and just need to let Claire know that. So some of these have to do with how wonderful your film is. I mean, there have been so many comments about, you know, Sally from Westfield says, this is wonderful. Thank you both. I love the interplay of spirituality, family background, combating the thought of young people who dismiss older people as a challenge. Love the idea of emotional overcoat. Mafa from New York says, on your next film, what will you do differently? Lessons learned from this project.
Oh, you want me to answer that one?
If you want, it ties into one I was going to ask, what were some of the challenges, the highs and the lows, challenges and rewards, and I guess it's sort of ties in with what you said. Dee's last comment was like, what have you learned, and what would you do similarly or differently?
I think that
and would you even do it again? I guess.
Yeah, you know, I think your listeners are particularly appropriate audience for me to share this, other than people who are joining because they know me or they know you, which is the way we frame and quote unquote sell aging can really depend. I mean, everybody in aging is kind of struggling with financing to begin with. And I found that the challenge came from me. It would have been a different film if I had finished it in 2006. But I could have finished it in 2006. I might have had different people. It might have been a little different. But it had to do with financing. And I raised like almost $400,000 on my own, but I felt like I was donating a kidney and a bone marrow half the time. It was very difficult because when you're trying to give positive stories, if it's not wrapped up in the nice little package that some people like, cute older people, right, which is really dismissive, just like saying teenagers are all angst-ridden and acne-laden. It's just a complete simplification and diminution of that stage of life. And so I wrote, I'm a good writer, and I wrote so many grants and so many things. So I think if I had been able to, not for want of trying, but if I had been able to find a production company or a group that would kind of help me a little bit, it was a very solitary journey. It's a very hard thing to regret because I now know Dee, Anita, Paul, and their families. And how can you regret that? How can you regret the insights that have come from traveling to Puerto Rico and Yosemite and walking along, the golf course or watching Paul create a painting? I can't regret that, and I've changed my own feelings about later life. And I have a 40th high school reunion that got canceled now for the second time, and it's really funny to read the kind of comments that people have about moving towards your 60th year, your 59th year. And it's very self-degrading. As Ashton Applewhite says, it's prejudice against your future self. So I would say that financing was really difficult, finding the right characters, trying to find the balance, worrying that I didn't have the right balance, that I didn't have enough diversity, am I not appealing to the right people? And then unfortunately, the film didn't get into any film festivals, so I'm looking for ways to get promotion, to get press about it, because you have to build up interest in the film. And all the time, I would say, also working as a nurse has been challenging. But, I don't want to sit here sucking my thumb saying it was really hard. It was hard financially, but But in all other ways, it's been really enriching. And I hope that it continues to enrich other people. And I think we do our best when we're kind of doing things where things move through us and out to other people. And that's what I try to do when I'm a nurse with a preemie and their parents, and it's what I try to do with this film. And hopefully I still have possibilities ahead of me, but I think that in terms of a next film, right now I would tell everybody I'm going to focus on this film. I spent 20 years of my life working on it, and I'm going to really work on outreach and seeing ways that people can use the film for their own purposes and for their own edification, for their own family and friends, and really focus on living out the dedication that I gave to this one. But I always have other ideas.
I just, one more thing here. Judy from Medford says, she had put a quote from Kierkegaard, "We live our lives forward and we understand them backwards." And her other comment and question is, and I think this fits with just what you were saying and maybe a good one to, as we end. Thank you for sharing. This is one of the best coverage of aging that is informational, inspirational, and ageless. Great metaphors and opportunities for a viewer to experience their own aging. How can we help you promote this film and through the film a better understanding that aging begins the day we are born? Seems like that might be a good question following up on just what you were saying. I mean, what are ways that people listening can be of help?
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you for that Kierkegaard quote, which I know and I love and I feel like is definitely part of the film. So if you have outreach ideas, I am still compiling this long list, and I'm still in the analog world, so I'm trying to get it into a spreadsheet. If you have ideas for journalists who might want to write about the film, I'm waiting a little bit. Next Avenue is probably going to do a piece about the film, but I have to wait until I figure out the distribution, whether I get distribution or not, which is in process right now. But I can still find out about writers and journalists and things like that. So I had asked Next Avenue to just wait so that if I do have a educational distributor, I can direct people to them instead of, having them come to me. Because the funny thing about the documentary film world is if you offer it to the public, no distributor will take it. So I've had to been riding this little range of, festivals and then educational distribution but I will retain the ability to give it to certain individuals on a much discounted basis. If you have ideas for a discussion guide, if any of you out there are educators, I am creating different activities for different age groups. For instance, speaking to younger kids, not too younger, but younger kids about what does an older person look like or walk like, somebody gets out there, and then have an older person come out and shift their minds, because not all younger people know their grandparents these days. But finding ways to have a really interactive toolkit for people that I would also offer for educational screenings and other institutional screenings, and any other encouragement or ideas that you have, including just feedback, helps me enormously on an emotional level. I got to be honest, because it's been a strong thing. But if you have any great ideas, I know that your listeners, Dory, are just a wealth of knowledge and promoting this kind of work to begin with. So thank you.
So why don't you again give your email address for people?
Okay. And just like today, I can do some private screenings. Once I figure out distribution, I'll be able to do things, and I'll make myself available when I can. But my website is lightyearsfilm.com. My email is info@lightyearsfilm.com. And if you're on social media, I'm for Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, it's @lightyearsfilm. And then on LinkedIn, it's Claire Marie Panke, CLAIREMARIEPAN as in Nancy KE. And that's all on the handout. So I'm just really grateful for this opportunity and for all the enthusiasm. You're filling me up, and I really appreciate everybody's comments and questions.
Great. And there have been, I can't read all of them, but people just are saying, I can't wait to see the film, and just, how wonderful hearing about it. And, and I know the timing of it and COVID and, everything has just muddled it so much more. So if any of the listeners can be helpful of, suggestions and whatever, that would be wonderful.
And down the line, when COVID opens up, as a nurse, I'm really going to be safe about that. But I'm really looking forward to in-person right. screenings, and no audience is too small. You know, a couple of people around a living room can have a great conversation.
And again, keep in mind, everybody, that if you write to Claire at the email she mentioned, the info@lightyearsfilm.com, and tell her that you listened today, you'll get a discount either for the streaming or for the DVD itself. So, Claire, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing it is your baby. What's your I can't even call it a baby anymore because it's 20 years.
Yeah.
So, and I know it's been a long slog for you, but it's beautiful, and you really have such a lovely way in the film about dealing with life and resilience and the, sort of these intersecting people and themes, and you have a beautiful way of presenting it. So I'm delighted that you've been able to be with us today. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you
and
so much.
And for you, stay well and safe. And for everybody, I know it's challenging times with this Delta variant, but stay well and safe.
You've been listening to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio with Dr. Dorian Mintzer. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show, listen to past episodes, or download our free retirement transition guide, visit revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com.